enough, but it seems good now.
Yeah, you're clear now. And hopefully I am too. That's
Yeah.
always what we hope for.
Yeah, you're good now.
Great. There'll just be one awkward moment where I try to figure out how my computer works and put you on Facebook. And
Oh,
then we'll
I
do
think
the
we
show.
can pull off more than one awkward moment.
You can? You think so? All
Oh yeah.
right, I'll take that as a
I'm not worried
challenge.
about it.
Somebody out here is going to have to keep a tally of it. All right. So Shane, thank you again so much for being here. It's really a privilege. We're super stoked to have you. You know, if you could just maybe start off by telling us a little bit about who you are, where you started,
Sure.
what are you working on now? What are you excited about now? All that stuff.
Oh my goodness, how much time do I have?
Take all the time you want, man.
Actually, that's legitimately not a bad question for just how long is this event, just so I can mentally. I tend to be I speak in essay form a lot of times and can be a little long-winded. So
Uh,
sometimes people need to reel me in a little bit.
I think that we're shooting to be going for about an hour and a half.
Okay.
But if we go for 2 hours, that's cool too.
I have exactly 90 minutes worth of things to say. I'm going to make
Perfect.
every single word count, and then and then I'm going to be out. I'll never have a thought again in my life.
Awesome. So
Um,
glad we'll get your final thought, man. That's perfect.
the reality is I have prepared for this in no way whatsoever, but
Awesome.
I'm quite confident that that the amount of isolation that I've been in will force plenty of things to spew out of my face at a probably irritating rate. My name is Shane Mauss. I'm a stand-up comedian. I was a stand-up comedian. I'm from Wisconsin. I had like a wholesome Midwestern upbringing. I moved to become a stand-up comedian when I was like 23, so back in 2004, and I had depending on where this matters in the story, when I was 16 years old, I was first introduced to psychedelics. They were just the thing that I connected with the most. They were the best thing that I had some of the best experiences I had ever had, and changed me, made me a better person, made me more creative and everything else, and gave me a lot of the confidence that I would then eventually need to go and try to do the silliest possible occupation on the planet. And so I started comedy. I was like a traditional short joke-ish absurdist, like setup punch kind of stuff. I had a somewhat fast rise in traditional comedy in terms of I was able to get on late night and things like that, really like at record setting speed. It was I wish I would have been equipped to handle all of the early opportunities that I had much too early in my career, but it made me kind of reflect on what I wanted to do with my platform. And there tends to be a there's this tendency a lot of times for comedians. You figure out joke structures, you get a little bit of attention, and then you go, now I have a platform and I better use it and I want to say important things. Um and I didn't know exactly what that was at the time. I thought maybe I'd be a political comedian or something. Maybe. Thank God I didn't go that route. And I was always reading science books, and in my off time, and I never really put it together, but I eventually kind of started merging science into my act a little bit. I eventually started a podcast called Here We Are, where I interview a different scientist each week. A lot of evolutionary biology and psychology, a lot of stuff about cognitive biases, perception, behavioral economics, academics, why we spend money in the way that we do, why we prefer the mates that we do, that sort of thing. And I started putting together themed like solo shows because I was touring internationally. And so I did a show about mating behavior that was all this kind of sciencey stuff, and then I did an album about the evolution of negative emotions. And then I had all of this material about psychedelics because I'd been doing them for so long, and I was doing bits here and there in my act. And at the time, I wasn't involved in any psychedelic community or anything like that. I'd never been to Burning Man. I wasn't part of the culture. I was just eating a bunch of mushrooms by myself as often as I could find mushrooms. And they were a big part of my development and interest in how the mind works, and my interest in talking with scientists. So I actually don't really talk about psychedelics much on my podcast, but I use my experiences quite a bit, and my thoughts about what perception and consciousness are, and how we think about ourselves and self-awareness and that sort of thing. That guides a lot of my questions that I then ask more straight-laced academic types, I guess. And so I one day, so podcasting had taken off. This was like now 8 years ago or whatever. One day I was on Pete Holmes' You Made It Weird podcast, actually to talk about breaking both of my feet because I'm a lunatic. I've always been like a adrenaline junkie. I'm an idiot. I take way too many chances in life. You kind of have to be a stand-up comedian in a lot of ways. That's not true, but that's a story I tell myself. And I have we got into this conversation. He was like, "Where were you?" "Oh, I was in Sedona." "What were you doing in Sedona?" "Well, I was supposed to go there to do ayahuasca for the first time. Never got a chance to do it because I was out hiking and broke my feet first." "What's ayahuasca?" "Well, there's this stuff DMT that I smoke." "What's DMT?" Then we started talking about DMT, and when I started talking about DMT, it took over the entire conversation. It was something that, even though I had some jokes about psychedelics here and there in my act, I even think that I did a mushroom joke on Conan years and years ago, but and had one on my first album and stuff, but it wasn't, I couldn't get away with doing much more than 5 minutes of psychedelic material. Usually it was goofier stuff. And so I did this, I talked about DMT on this podcast. All of a sudden I'm getting all these messages about like, this is the most interesting thing I've ever heard of. I was like, okay, well, I have more things to say about it. And I was sitting on an hour's worth of material about psychedelics. I assumed I would need to like become some big comic that could like easily sell out a theater or something like that before I would be able to talk about psychedelics more openly. Instead, my agent at the time was smart and had happened to listen and was like, "Well, if you have all this material, why don't we put together a little indie show?" And so I put together this show called The Good Trip. This is back in like 2015. It was my first like indie solo show, all about psychedelics and a bunch of my jokes about it, experiences, a bunch of the research. I ended up putting together a large tour, which ended up being 111 cities. That was from 2016 to 2017. In the meantime, I had partnered with Maps because I have a sciencey take. There's lots of, as you guys know, many different aspects to the community, and I love them all. But I tend to be a little more toward the Map side of scientific rigor ish, and I mean, that's not how I use psychedelics, but that's how I see the movement going forward. And it's also how I find myself thinking about kind of the role in perception and consciousness. I had a lot of horrible depression issues since I was like 10 years old or so. That's what mushrooms were for me. DMT was more of just an exploration, kind of adrenaline filled journey for me. And so I do this big tour eventually. So I had no idea people even wanted to know about psychedelics. Lo and behold, all these people came out. They were the best audiences ever. And that's why I was like, well, I guess I'm going to put together a whole tour about this. I do this whole tour. I get on all these podcasts talking about it. Someone hears me talking about it. reaches out to me. They were already familiar with my work and made a lot of comedy specials, wanted to make something with me, didn't know what. I had an interest in making a documentary. We didn't know what that documentary was going to be about. At first, I wanted to make it about evolutionary biology, but it just so happened that I was invited to be in this comedy gala at the MAPS Psychedelic Science Conference in 2017, and I was like, this thing's coming up in a month. It's only once every 4 years. It's all the top researchers in psychedelics. Let's go there and shoot some stuff. So we went there, got a bunch of awesome interviews, and ended up making a documentary called Psychonautics, a comics exploration of psychedelics, where I had intended to kind of show people a lot of the modern research and showcase some of my material about it and everything too, but also just I had intended to show people just how safe psychedelics were, because I had had nothing but positive experiences my entire 20 some years of using them. And I upped my use, and I kind of didn't follow my own usual practices. I ended up losing my mind a bit, which ended up kind of making for a pretty interesting documentary, and I thought added a lot of balance to the conversation, and made it less evangelical about psychedelics. It came with its own disclaimer because of what I ended up going through, which was like ended up in a psych ward at some point. And I've always been bipolar, but I had some pretty severe manic episodes. So yeah, that's my role within the psychedelic world, which is a little aspect of what I do. I mostly focus on combining science and comedy these days, but we're here to talk about psychedelics. So that's me in a long-winded nutshell.
Cool. Thank you so much, man. By the way, I'm still here. They just turned the lights off so that we can see your projection on stage a little bit better. I see that my
Sweet.
screen went black
I love
here.
it. I'll imagine that your face is just full of contentment and intrigue, and you're just loving every
incredibly handsome also, you know. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Shane. You know, I'm really intrigued about your DMT stories. It sounds like from listening to you talk about it, you've probably smoked DMT around 400 times. Is that accurate?
Well, I've had about 100 breakthroughs,
That's
and
crazy.
to have, yeah, it is. Looking back, I guess I didn't realize, like at the time, how. Yeah, I mean, mind you, some of those where I was having like 4 or 5 breakthroughs in a weekend or
Uh-huh.
something, and then going for months without having DMT, and so, but yeah, I mean, and I actually like DMT is the only thing I enjoy microdosing. And so, but I've attempted to because this was years ago, and it took me a long time to figure out kind of best methods for using it. Basically, at the time, I was just trying to figure out how to blast more of it into my skull as fast as possible, and trying a bunch of different devices and methods of using it and stuff. So, and it can be challenging to break through, especially until you've kind of figured out that perfect mix. And so I've missed a lot. So I've had like partial experiences, or like ended up in the waiting room or whatever, as they call it,
Yeah.
several times. And so I've had about 100 breakthroughs, but my last one was filmed on my documentary, and I haven't had a breakthrough since then, though I've microdosed it some.
That's a really intriguing concept to me. I've had some friends talk about microdosing DMT.
It's delightful.
How do you microdose DMT? I mean, do you just have like a really accurate scale and you just have the tiniest bit?
No, just if you have like I often have a vape pen
Okay.
of it, and so say it would take like 3 to 5 hits to have a breakthrough, I would just have like a half of a hit or 1 hit or something like
Okay.
that.
What are the
So
benefits?
I mean, a benefit. I don't know. It's just delightful. I mean, I don't. In terms of benefits, I don't necessarily really recommend DMT to anybody.
Okay.
I mean, I do. I know that there's people that have had therapeutic uh, benefits from it. I'm not sure that I have. I've had some incredibly remarkable experiences and had what I think are pretty interesting insights about maybe aspects of how the mind works, and some thoughts about neuroscience from many of my experiences. And that's why but in terms of like mood or depression or whatever, I wouldn't. I think that if anything, a DMT experience runs the risk of, in a few people, maybe making reality seem a little slippery, and it being too jarring of an
Mhm.
experience for the average person. So I'm definitely not like mushrooms. I'm a little more prone to be like, get out there, give it a shot. But DMT, I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea if it's right for you. And So yeah, it's the microdose experiences. I mean, for me, if anyone's actually done DMT, it's just like the come down where you have this delightful buzz, and there's just like a little sparkle to life for 20 minutes, and this um, great body high, and everything's just like slightly like an odd, peculiar feeling, but everything's still like normal-ish in every other way.
Cool. So we've heard you talk about science. I've been listening to your podcast, which I
Oh,
love.
thanks.
Everybody should check it out. It's super cool. Um, Here
Thanks,
we
man.
are. Yeah, well, thank you. And one of the things that I've noticed about the psychedelic community, just kind of, I travel in this circle pretty frequently, obviously. Um, on the one hand, you get a whole lot of woo woo. And then on the other hand, you get like people who are super into psychedelics and are like super into physics, and chemistry. Um, I- and I'm
Yeah.
wondering, where do you land? Like, you talk a lot about science, but where do you land on that? What are your interpretation of your experiences?
Well, that's difficult to say. I like if I'm having a philosophical conversation about psychedelics, I will tend to be more, like I just had Andrew Gallimore on talking about DMT on my podcast. I have like one psychedelic episode a year, and I just had him on. We had like a 2.5 hour conversation, and he's a neuroscientist and tries to present an idea of like, this is us talking with aliens and from a different dimension. And I would say that I was, some people might even argue, more skeptical, or I don't want to say scientific, more skeptical than he was. I tend to think these experiences originate in the mind, and they're a window into aspects of the subconscious that are always there and driving many of our behaviors and storing our memories. And it's a lot like the movie Inside Out, in my way of looking at it. Like I think that I want to see a sequel. I want to make a sequel of that movie called Outside In, where that little girl as an adult smokes DMT for the first time and pops down into that world and sees all of her emotions as characters. And it's like, oh my God, there's like this joyful God and this angry God and all of these different worlds, and like these glowing balls moving around, and things were constructing, and there's a roller coaster. And I think that it's not a perfect metaphor, but my take is that maybe what we're seeing in the DMT experiences. I've had plenty of experiences that make me question. Basically every experience I've ever had on DMT makes me question that point of view, but that's where I arrive after integrating. And I so philosophically, I tend to, I was raised Catholic, and it didn't jive with me. And so I was for some time kind of an angry atheist. Actually, ironically, learning a lot about evolution made me appreciate religion and spirituality and religiosity quite a bit more as I uh, got older. And and so I mean, I go back and forth. I it would be a stretch to say that I connect much on a spiritual level, even though if I was in an experience in reporting subjectively what it felt like, I think some of the spiritual language would help capture
Mm-hmm.
the subjective feeling. But but in terms of hanging out with, I mean, my last serious girlfriend was uh, super hippie girl, and I tend to hang out with hippies and tend to be a little more toward the spiritual side. In terms of um, so you know, in terms of people that I want to hang out with, like sign me up for Burning Man or whatever.
All right.
You know, that's but I don't know. I like scientists as well. In terms of moving the movement forward, I think that there's a lot of ways of attacking it. And I think the spiritual aspect is a really great and important one. But my position is that I think that the kind of stuff that MAPS and like Johns Hopkins and stuff are doing to legitimize things are probably going to be, in my way of thinking about it, the surest way forward, because think that someone I don't think that the average person um hearing my story of like meeting some purple goddess lady in DMT hyperspace is going to make the average person be like, we should legalize that. Even though they should. I'm a big believer in cognitive liberties. But you know, the within the reality of the cultural environment that we're in, I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to do the of like, well, look, we can help the troops and the sexual assault victims and all of these things, that like all that stuff is terrific, but it's unfortunate that it's such a necessity that we need to use those, like pander to those, like, well, if we want to get on Fox News and talk about these things, we better talk about PTSD or whatever. It shouldn't be the case, but it is. And even that doesn't go mainstream, because I don't think that that the mainstream still cares enough about mental health
Mm.
for us to make movement fast enough. As I, as I think that we are in
Uh-oh.
the greatest mental health crisis of our lifetimes. You need to think the embarrassing. You can talk about depression.
Clayton over here. Kess over here. Um, and hopefully we'll get him back. There you go.
Howdy, check 1 2.
Hey, how we doing? Can you hear us?
All right.
Cool.
Yeah, great. It's 2020. Let's pretend like nothing happened. Where was
Nothing
I?
happened. It was fine. NBD.
I was talking about the messaging, right, with PTSD.
Yeah.
Did I get cut off right around there? So
Yeah.
the unfortunate situation is that if you were to like, most people just aren't going to give a shit. They're going to say, pull up your bootstraps, just stop whining, you know. But if you were to say that there's a hint of a chance, like has shown just like the slightest possibility that the psychedelic experience can give you better erections, mushrooms would be legal tomorrow.
Right,
I promise you.
right.
And people, you wouldn't be able to give enough disclaimers for people. You could take the person that today is the most against psychedelics, and tomorrow you could be like, hey, just a fair warning, they might make you crazy, you might have a manic episode. People be like, well, I'm gonna go crazy if I don't get my dick harder. That's just where that's where people's priorities were at. And I actually think that I think it's actually not a bad idea to, I should put a hat on, or I've never had long hair before, so sorry if I look like a lunatic and I
You
keep
look
on
so good.
adjusting my hair at the I don't mean to be like twirling my hair on a date the whole time, but I so the and the funny thing is I actually think that you could prove that most erectile dysfunction is just related to stress, because of it's a whole thing of during a fight or flight response, the stress response is meant to delegate energy away from unnecessary things, and direct it toward like mobilizing energy toward muscles, so you can like run from danger or fight or whatever. And so it shuts down digestion and aspects of immunity and sex drive. This is no time to, if you're running from a lion or whatever, this is no time to have an erection. And so most sexual dysfunctions for men are related to aspects of sex, probably monogamy too, but but you could make a case that anything mindful related would lead to a more consistent arousal for men. But you don't say any of that. All that you do is you put together the data in all these studies: MDMA for PTSD, psychedelics for psilocybin for depression, whatever. All you got to do is give them a big questionnaire with everything on there. What's your family life like? What's your income like? How's your job? What's your sex life? How are your erections? You just put get all the data you can, and then from that, I promise you, what you're going to find is that people are going to be like, you know what? I have been having better erection, because PTSD ruins erections. But you don't say that. You just make the headline, mushrooms makes dicks harder. And that's how you make mushrooms legal. And then people will do them for all the wrong reasons, of course, but at least we got them in their mouths.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have the experience, probably feel a little silly for what drove them to have that but they will have had it, and maybe then become a bit more self-aware, open up a bit more, see some of the benefits, and then there we go. Silly example, but the point is that we will need to create really inventive messaging to, I think this is going to be a harder push than legalizing marijuana. And so we're going to have to really innovate some ways of getting the messaging to people. And I don't see the spiritual side of that being as strong of a case for your average, rural American checking the vote for decriminalizing psilocybin or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, for most people, we really only want to take a substance if it's going to like optimize us, right? Like, how am I going to make $10,000 more this year? Is my dick going to get harder? That's, by the way, quote of the night: mushrooms make your dick hard. That's going on the next Denver Psychedelic Club t-shirt.
I mean, if we all start like doing more curls and stuff, that's the thing these days. If you have big biceps, people are like, well, I want to hear what this guy has to say about science. And so, so maybe if the spiritual crowd listening to us more, that's just called. Did I cut out again,
We
or did
got you.
that joke just bomb?
You're back.
I cut out. Whew. All right.
So did we get everything? Much for your patience.
Hello.
Hello.
All right.
Thanks for bearing with us with all
No
this internet
problem.
stuff.
If I think that you could make an argument that psychedelics would help with IT frustrations, just because they're just generally beneficial and good for for helping patients and everything. But you don't say that. You just make the headline: "Mushrooms will help with your IT frustrations."
Yeah, that's why we're all staying so mellow over here in Denver, where we're decriminalized. We're not freaking out when the computer crashes. So, on the subject of the spiritual thing with psychedelics, I'm curious, you mentioned that you went to,
Sure.
I think you said Sedona, and you were going to take ayahuasca, but it didn't work out. I'm curious if you ever managed to take ayahuasca, and have you ever smoked my favorite substance, 5-MeO DMT?
So I have done ayahuasca 3 times.
Okay.
The first 2 were exceptionally mild. And I was like, what is the fuss about? Like, I didn't understand it. I had had quite a few DMT experience before that, so I just figured, I was just like, oh, I guess it's just, a very mild version. And if you've smoked a DMT and had these intense experiences, maybe ayahuasca doesn't do much for you or something like that. I didn't know. I didn't understand it. I went to go and do ayahuasca the 3rd time, to get ready to do it on film for the documentary. And I had the single greatest psychedelic experience of my life, but also I was already manic, because I was doing mushrooms like 3 times a week through the filming of my documentary, and which is an unnecessary amount of mushrooms, and not allowing for integration, which integration is what the psychedelic. I don't even like the psychedelic experience most of the time. Not, I shouldn't say most of the time. Many of the times, I mostly am like, let's get this thing over with. And at first it was like, whoa, when I was 16 or whatever, like, whoa, I see all these things and cool, like. But as an adult, that now I often do mushrooms like by myself when I do them. It's just meditative. I journal and things like that, and I'm usually just like, let's get this experience over with, so then I can benefit from the integration afterwards. But I wasn't doing that during the documentary. We had a small budget and a short window of time to film it in, and so I just and whatever other stories I'm telling myself. But I ended up doing, so I had this ayahuasca experience. I went fully I had never had like a full on. I've been hypomanic, like, lots, like at least once a year through, since I was like a teenager. But I had never had a full manic episode, and I was manic for like a week, and then did a big dose of mushrooms again at a Roger Waters concert. I knew I already had the tickets. I already had friends there. We were already committed. I knew I was like teetering on crazy, and I was like, fuck it. And because I take way too many risks in life, and I and that really launched me. And then that launched me into like a pretty intense, like 3-week manic episode at at the end of which I was hospitalized a few times. The third time, finally, they put me on meds and put me in a psych ward for a week and stuff. But so that was the last time that I had done ayahuasca. I was supposed to do several other things for the documentary, including salvia, which I really have no actual interest in. But for a documentary, I'll do it. And then five, I was really, really looking forward to. I was saving that for the documentary and was going to do it on the documentary, as well as ibogaine. Actually, ibogaine I was
Nice.
supposed to do, and then the place in Mexico that I was going to like got shut down by this and that right before I was supposed to go. And then but 5-meo, I actually, it was unfortunate because I had one experience lined up and then we canceled last minute, thinking that we had more time to do it another day. And now I still, so I still haven't done it. I haven't done many psychedelics at all since, by comparison, from before that happened to me to after. I've had like maybe 10 mushroom trips in the last 3 years, which is a small amount for me. And then um, I did 2019 was a big ketamine year for me.
Cool.
And boy, I love ketamine. Wish I went to ran out right before or right when quarantine started. But who saw this coming?
You're right.
Um, but yeah, so five is probably number one on my bucket list, and then
Uh,
there's a couple other there's always some new research chemicals out there, and there's a few. There's one I have written down somewhere that I can't think of off the top of my head that sounds pretty interesting, that I'd
what
never heard
kind
of
is it?
before until recently. It's like a ketamine-ish,
Okay.
DMT-ish kind of experience, that someone that I respect a lot, and I think has had more DMT experiences than me, was, they were raving about it so much that I was like, that sounds like mania. But boy, they were selling it. Whatever it was, I don't know. But anyway, so there's five, and then this one other thing that I don't, off the top of my head, remember the name of, are the next two that I would love to do. I'm right now figuring out, I might go to LA soon for the winter. I'm figuring that out. I came here to I'm in my childhood bedroom right now. I was in LA when I was touring full time.
Mhm.
I was in 3 cities a week through all of 2019 and onward. I spent a year living on. My first year living on the road. I was trying to spend 3 years straight living on the road, like out of Airbnbs and stuff. And this happened, and I came to visit my parents, thinking like, I'll wait till this blows over, and now that's where I am. And so, not a lot of psychedelic use
Fair enough.
going on at the moment, but
I
we'll
hear
see. I
that.
might be moving soon. We'll see. I don't have a job anymore, so that's a thing.
Man, that's rough. I'm sorry to hear that. And, looking forward to when you
It
can get
is what
back
it
on the road. You're
is.
looking at fall 2021, right? When you're going to get back on the road.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have my expectations super high
Okay.
for things being. I don't want to tour again until people can confidently pack in a room
Hmm.
maskless, which is going to require a really good vaccine and public confidence in it and all of the messaging. That's one thing. The I'm not some like super pro vaccine guy, but I'm also not. If there's way too much anti-vax and anti-mask
Hmm.
stuff going on in the psychedelic community, and I think it would be a wonderful opportunity for us to reflect on some of the motivated reasoning going on, and so that we're legitimizing the positive aspects of what we do, and offering alternative treatments as a supplement, and as a as a supplementary and as a additional option for people, without relying on writing off all of modern science and the medical community, because that benefits you selling whatever your herbal supplement or
Yeah.
whatever is. And there's an unfortunate amount of that going on right now. I'm sure there's some in the room, and I don't mean to offend anyone. And it's not that I think that my perspective is the be all end all perspective, but man, I've seen some pretty, I mean, it's made me not want to talk about psychedelics as much, because of
Mm.
the negative aspects of the conspiracy side of the psychedelic community rearing a pretty ugly head through all of this, it's pretty shocking. I think people are confusing science with authority. I wish science had a bit of authority right now, because we'd be in a lot
Same.
better shape. But yeah, so that's, I could talk more about that if you want, but I uh that all of that is to say, September 2021, which is when I plan to start touring again. My estimate is by January 2022, I would be able to tour again. So I'm
Okay.
focusing on, I'm writing a book, at least, and I'm working on like beefing up my Patreon and like other offerings like that. I'm not super interested in doing like quarantine compromised stand-up comedy. I think meetups like yourself, where you're doing and you can do a distance thing or distance. I mean, the idea of being in a distance restaurant, that's like a selling point. If before COVID there's a restaurant that's like, no one sits within 10 feet of you, I'd be like, I want to go to that restaurant.
Right.
That sounds
Yeah.
amazing. but
Love
but
that.
stand-up comedy is a thing where you really need people packed in tight, because laughter is contagious, and there's all these,
Mm.
you want the lights to be down, you want low ceilings, you want all these things. It doesn't need to be perfect, but if it's not what it should be. And so yeah, touring is for me, there's a lot of people doing it, and it's not, I hope it's working out for them. And this is such an amazing time to innovate, and for me, it's just, I've been on the road for 14 years, and I'm just trying to use this as the break that it is, and work on other aspects of what I'm doing. And I'm like, I quit drinking and smoking cigarettes, and I've been exercising a bunch, and I've been right, and so I'm working on personal development and adding a bunch of aspects to my career that will be will be an added benefit to what I do, even after COVID is no longer, we have really effective therapeutics and things like that,
Awesome.
for people. But yeah, the consumer confidence is not, there's people that will fill a comedy club right now, but it's not to, that's like, not a huge part to have like 60 or 70% of the population that would have no interest in going and sitting in a room packed full of people, is, even if you think COVID is a hoax or not a big deal or whatever, for me, as someone that produces my own shows, that's impossible. It's already difficult to get butts in the seat with 100% of the
Mhm.
marketplace interested in going out, let alone and now with even, it doesn't matter if there's regulations or not, there's just people that aren't going to go out. So
Totally.
um,
Yeah. Well, we're looking
anyway,
forward to having you back out on the road, and hope you come to Denver when you do. I'll be there for sure.
Denver is so my I moved from Wisconsin to Boston when I started comedy, and that I was there for 6 years, and that's when I realized that was about 3 years too many, and I want to live in a new city for about 3 years at a time. I was in Austin, Texas for 2 years, Malibu for a couple years, Culver City for 2 or 3 years, Portland for a couple years, and I'm figuring out what my next move is. And Denver is definitely in the top 5, probably top 3.
Hell yeah.
And so I'll definitely, at some point in my life, I would be surprised if I don't live in the Denver area.
That's
So
great.
I love it there. Yeah.
Well, hey man, you
And I
can.
was supposed to be there for like a month this summer, touring all around and doing, I have many
Mhm.
different shows that I do. And man, yeah, I was super looking forward to that. How is Denver right now with everything with,
Well, I
I mean,
think
there's like the
Denver is.
fires going on and stuff.
Yeah, so yesterday I went rock climbing, and when we were driving back from the mountain, are
Nice.
you a rock climber?
I am.
Oh man, move to Denver. Let's go
Normally.
rock climbing together.
Yeah, man, I'm into
So
it.
into that. So we were driving back from the crag, and there was like this plume of smoke coming up from the ground to the sky, and it was just like this sheet of smoke all along the sky, and we were just like, holy shit, that is unbelievable. I mean, it's pretty sad that's happening. This is
Yeah.
the worst forest fire in the history of Colorado. I think the one we saw burning actually was a different one, because there's multiple ones going on right now. We get California's burning, we're burning. It's 2020. Everything's
I
happening.
I remember when Trump got elected, not to like continue to be polarizing or political or whatever, but I remember I mean, it was just like it was rough for me, and just for my career and everything else, because the type of it was like all the kind of worst kind of audience members in a comedy show are like the mega types, and they were like
Mhm.
emboldened more than ever. They're like, I guess everyone's on our side, and like thought that like people just were okay with hearing them tell racist street jokes to you and whatnot after shows, and because of the lack of self-awareness and whatnot. But I I remember calling Doblin like a week afterwards, and just like I was having a rough time. I'm like, I don't know what to make of it. And he's like, well, this is like, those difficult experiences where it brings these things to the surface, these problems to the surface that you didn't know were there before, the things that we need to work on people didn't have the Trump signs out until after he got elected, and then they put them out, so we didn't know that they were there. And boy, I don't know how much longer I can keep on telling myself that silver lining narrative. It's like, okay, I get it. There's a bunch of problems, but I do think that has been one of the big things with the pandemic. And I think the saddest thing about all this, other than the horrific health problems and lack of life or loss of life, is that there's been so much opportunity. I think that we should be innovating. We should be making adjustments in schools and education and everything else that we have, and especially in mental health. I do think this is an incredible opportunity, and I think that because for the first time ever, you are hearing, because of like wanting to make points about like ending lockdowns or whatever. There's people that otherwise never gave a shit about mental health things are saying, what about people's mental health? And so we're getting to have this
Mhm.
national conversation on a level that I've never seen before. And I think that people in the psychedelic community are so well adapted. We could be leaders in this. We could be guiding people through this experience, because so much of I mean this global pandemics are so much more. I mean, to me, they're so much like a mushroom trip, where
Totally.
all of a sudden you're thinking about the world and through these different lenses that you'd never experienced before, and you're like, boy, how does food get delivered? Like thinking all these thoughts that you don't normally find yourself at. You find yourself thinking about your wellness and your health more. Social issues come to the surface. It's like it's so much of like what just the culture has been talking about, and things that are being expressed on the news or normal media, which I normally can go get fucked as far as I'm concerned. But it's been interesting to hear these conversations being had uh, in such a big public way across all 24-hour news channels and everything else. And I think I think that as I think psychonauts and people that have a lot of experience with mindfulness, or even people that are just used to meditating a lot or whatever, have just a lot more experience confronting having to adapt to change or re-examine life and the things that go with, everyone's thinking about mortality more. That's like, it's just like every mushroom trip I've ever, it's actually, it's turning into an LSD trip, because it's like, all right, enough's
It can
enough.
be over now, right? It's still
Yeah,
going.
I get it.
I'm ready for
I
bed.
got the lessons. It's just getting a little annoying. Oh, the ceiling's squirming around. Neat.
Yeah, well said, man. I totally agree with you. I think that there are just certain things that you just never confront in your day-to-day life unless you're really diving in deep. And for most of my life, I can't speak for everybody here, but I was just a slacker about stuff. I was just like, oh, I'll worry
Yeah,
about mindfulness later and whatever. And then I started taking mushrooms,
me
and I was
too.
like, oh shit, I have to look at this thing. This is important. And then the other side of it too, regarding COVID, is like, I'm not, I hope I live for a few more decades, but like if I die tomorrow, that's okay. Like I think the psychedelic experience kind of gives you this comfortableness with the fact that you're gonna kick the bucket eventually. There's no getting away from it. It could be right now, or it could be 30 years from now. And yeah, I mean, not that I'm stoked about COVID either, but I do think that a lot of people in this community have been handling it a lot better. So it's cool to hear you speak to
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, I absolutely think that I also think that and it, I guess that's why I've been a hair discouraged by some of the people that are just trying to write it off or whatever, because I think that I've never seen an opportunity like this to bring uh, so many people from so many different backgrounds together,
Yeah.
and to have a common objective, to have a common threat, or whatever, and to be able to cooperate around it. I think that I think that there's still plenty of time for people to come around, and even if no one, even if there's a lot of people that have not came around by the time all of this is said and done, I think reflecting back on the experience will still make people be like, oh, well, maybe I could have played ball a little bit more, with everyone else, and done my not that difficult of a part. But it's I also take it for granted that, like, I don't, because I think much because of the psychedelic experience, I can just adapt really quickly.
Yeah.
And I didn't have like habits really, or routine. I had some bad ones, but my life was always on the move. I was always in a new area. I was always, if you talk with any of my friends, like if I haven't seen a friend in 2 years, they're like, I wonder what version of Shane we're going to get this time. I wonder what he's up to now. I always have like new hobbies, new things that I am into. I always have like a new weird look going. And so I take it for granted, and I should be a little more compassionate that a lot of people have lived almost the exact same life day in and day out, and to have such a dramatic change is maybe a little harder for them than it is for me, because even though I got the rug pulled out from under me and I don't get to have my career and I lost like 95% of my income and everything, I was able to very easily back in March be like, oh, is this what it is? Oh, okay. Well, adjust accordingly. You know, it is what it is, accept, move on, integrate. And this is another opportunity for people that have worked 9 to 5. You know, this is what we hope for in the mushroom
Yeah.
experience. It's like,
Yeah.
you're stuck in the wheel, man. You don't see it. You're the rat in the wheel. You're just too sucked into it. You need to pop out. And this is this opportunity to, people are now being forced to pop out, re-examine re-examine what they do for a living, re-examine their habits, their family life, what's important to them. People are going through their phones and connecting with everyone that they've ever met, and so it really is like a forced trip in many ways for people. So
Yeah.
you know, I think continuing to have these conversations, talk about it afterwards, and think about how, you know, the thing that's different about it is that every single day we're having to trip again and again
Uh-huh.
and again,
Yeah.
and that's going to be taxing. So I think that one thing that you could easily start telling people is take what do you do during a psychedelic experience? When you're doing it right, you focus on setting an intention, you know, and you might have you know, you kind of want to know a little bit about what you might expect or what might come up, but also when knowing that and having done the research and done the proper dose or whatever, you want to then try to get rid of those expectations and accept the experience when you're having it. And then afterwards you want to reflect on it and integrate and and take what is good from it and what is bad from your life, and see what you can do to make these small incremental gains to better yourself, better your relationships, whatever. And people can be doing this every day with you could do this with the news before you check Twitter or whatever. This is me talking to myself, by the way. Before you like check the news or check Twitter, you can go, what am I looking to get out of this? What's my dose? How much time am I actually going to spend doing this, and stick to it? And then afterwards, what did I learn from that? What was actually valid? What was just my mind messing with me? What was accurate information from that experience, and what wasn't? And then integrate it into your life. You can use those same kind of psychedelic therapy protocols in all of life every day in all of these experiences. And so I think that's something that we as psychedelic advocates can kind of start introducing the people in our lives to some of those practices without having to introduce them to psychedelics. And if they benefit them, they might ask you more about it, and then that might open the door to sharing some of the you know, catalysts for those insights
Mhm.
that gave you some of these practices in the first place.
That's such a great insight. And you know, I so hear what you're saying, and I'm also like looking at myself and thinking like, wow, I could really be applying these lessons for myself a lot more in my life, you
Yeah,
know, really working
I
that
mean, I'm
integration.
just saying things. I don't act on any of the crap that's coming out of
Yeah.
my mouth right now. Are you kidding me?
I hear that. So, you know, we kind of touched a little bit on some political things around COVID and around the president and what that's
Yeah,
brought.
I'm getting super edgy up here.
We
Wow. No one's ever heard a hot take on Trump before.
hey, this is a first for us, man. So we had a question from the audience actually about
Sure.
how do you feel about the politicization of science?
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking to me. I think that you know, the worst thoughts that I have is that humanity keeps on letting me down because I keep on having higher expectations for people's intelligence. And there's been a couple things that have happened. One, when COVID first happened, first off, we weren't sure about like what was the main mode of transmission. Is it surface transmission, which we now know isn't that big of a deal? Great news. Bad news is it's an aerosol, which they weren't sure early on. They thought maybe it was just droplets. But anyway, regardless, the mask stuff, it wasn't a surprise to me that there was pushback from like, the hardware store in my town had a nightmare of a situation trying to tell, the blue collar, I used to work construction and factory work, by the way. So these are like my people. I'm not talking shit. But there's, um, and not to be a cliche, but there are aspects of masculinity that can be toxic from time to time. Not to whatever.
No
I'm not going to
way.
get into all of that, but it's as I see it. That's been my experience in life, being from like raised around a bunch of like macho men and stuff. And so it wasn't a surprise to me that there was going to be like some guys that thought they were too tough for COVID or whatever, or I'm not going to care about this thing, or it's just a flu and misinformation. I didn't see coming, and I saw coming that people were going to resist like masks being like comfortable, or I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we haven't evolved to understand asymptomatic stuff, and our conscious narrative and our conscious perception doesn't jive with what we see. Just like this is the same argument that we're going to have with climate change. So this is really good practice for us, because we can feel temperature. We didn't evolve any sensory software for feeling climate being measured over decades. We have tools and we're great tool makers, and we can use that aspect of ourselves, but we don't have like a gut feeling other than like seeing litter or something like that for these kind of invisible threats or whatever. And so it's not a surprise that consciousness in people has this pushback of something just not quite feeling right. If people were hacking up things in public or sneezing or whatever, you have a natural aversion to want to be 6 feet away, or tell them to cover their mouth or clean up after them. But because of the asymptomatic spread, that's going to be really tricky for people. What did surprise me was this idea that like masks and not wearing masks became this like red blue or something like that. I never saw that coming, and I think it's pretty pathetic, actually. And it's not just the MAGA people that are anti-maskers. Like I said, there's plenty of conspiracy folks on the left that are like, oh, you're putting on it, I've seen the word slave muzzle about 100
Whoa.
times too many in
Damn.
my in my interactions with people. And I think that's absolutely pathetic and unexcusable. And I've seen it come out, from people in the psychedelic community, that and it's just like, I think conspiracy people are having a bit of a time right now, and it's a way in which learned helplessness, without getting into it, it's a way, it's just when learned helplessness is when you don't have control or ability to predict. Those are the two big predictors of stress in
Mhm.
life. And when you don't have either of those, when you don't have control and you don't have predictability, it can lead to learned helplessness, meaning that you won't be able to see opportunities for change and predictability. And so what that then leads to is this conscious consciousness is the story we tell ourselves, usually after the fact, of these underlying things that already happened in our mind before we ever made our decisions. And we're quite confident in these conscious narratives and think that they're true, and we think that we know why we behave the way that we do. And so, conspiracy stuff pops up whenever there's some big dramatic thing like 9/11 or whatever else that happens, that is this scary feeling of like, whoa, how did you didn't see that coming, and I had no control over the situation. And you're going to see these fanciful stories, just like I'll tell a girl a fanciful story that I'm trying to impress on a date or whatever else. The consciousness does this trick of telling these fanciful stories to get us to justify these kind of internal motives. And so yeah, that the anti-mask stuff is, and I get that people are like, no one should be yelling at someone for not wearing a mask when they're just like out, hiking and they're not around anyone else.
Yeah.
I think that happened a little bit early on and caused people to dig in a little bit. But the idea of yelling at someone for wearing a mask is something I never saw that coming. That's complete insanity, and yeah, it's discouraging. So I don't know exactly what the solution is to that, but that's
Sure.
been the main thing that I've seen. That and like things like the Sturgis bike rally.
Yeah.
That was when I first saw it happen. I remember there were like a 250,000 people are predicted to show up. It's usually 500,000 people, and I was like, no way are 250,000 people going to show up. People are smarter than that. I know that. Okay, whatever, that's gonna happen. It ended up being 92% of what Sturgis normally was. And I saw that and I was like, I saw a newspaper, it said 8% less. And I was like, I don't believe that. They must be making this up. So I look into it and and it's like, I'm like reading the stories. I'm fascinated by it. And I realized that, oh my gosh, 5 to 10% of the population of Sturgis each year comes from overseas. It's from international tourism, meaning just as many people went to
Wow.
Sturgis, just as many Americans went to Sturgis this year as any other year, with a global pandemic going on. There were people having sneezing contests in
No
bars
way.
because they thought that was funny. There was a guy, I was reading some guy that's like, you gotta laugh at some point, but it was, people are going to see Smash Mouth. That's what you're risking your life to see. Amazing. And the spread that came after that they're still like figuring out is incredible. But which is, now I'm in the Midwest and we're getting a lot of stuff in the Midwest. Ever since that, all the numbers have gone up. There's school opening, everything else. But anyhow, there was a guy that was like, yeah, I wish people would. There was a guy that went to Sturgis. He was talking to a newspaper reporter, like as if he was like the smart one trying to say sensible things. And he was like, yeah, I do wish people would take things a little more seriously around here. People are talking like it's a hoax. I know COVID's not a hoax because I had it. It nearly killed me. Doctor says I have 50% lung capacity.
Oh my God.
And he was at Sturgis. People think it's like the chicken pox or something, and you get it and you're immune forever. And which is not at all the case. And so he's at Sturgis, and he's the one that was talking about the sneezing in a bar thing, which meant not only did he go to Sturgis, not only did he go into a bar indoors with a bunch of anti-maskers, but that was like when they started having the sneezing contest. That was like his come to Jesus moment, where he was like, you know what? Enough's enough.
Yeah.
This is getting silly. I better get out of here. The sneezing contest was the straw that broke the camel's back. So it has been, it's been a sad laugh that I've been having, because it's a laugh about the human condition. And it's not just that these people are infecting other people. I don't want anyone getting sick from this.
Of course.
These people don't know what they're getting into. They think you
Yeah.
either survive or you die. It's not the case. My aunt got COVID 3 weeks ago. She was in great shape. Lost her sense of smell and
Oh
taste.
man.
Hasn't had any energy for 3 weeks. Just went to the doctors telling her she might not get her smell or taste back for 6 months, but she'll probably at least get one of them back. You
Whoa.
want to not. How much would I have to pay you to not have your sense of smell or your sense of taste for the rest of your life? I'm not trying to scare people and like say that's the normal thing to happen, but people aren't understanding the
Yeah.
reality of what this is. And it's unfortunate, because I've talked with infectious disease people that, now, I've never gotten a single 6 years I've been doing a science podcast. There's never been like, well, I don't know about the science of this dung beetle researcher. I don't know if they know what they're talking about. I question the legitimacy of their dung beetle research, or I'm not sure this person knows their marketing psychology. Like that, never once did I get an email like that. I put out a COVID episode. You know the amount of hate mail that I get? The amount of hate mail that infectious disease people that are working double the number of hours for no extra pay to try to save the world get hate mail from people constantly, just for trying to do their job better than they've ever done it. It's crazy. So, it's been 7 months. I think people are slow to adapt, and people will come around. Thanks for letting me blow off some steam a little bit. We can talk about psychedelics again now if you want. I haven't talked with people much lately. I tend to get a little
Hey man, we're glad you're
provoked.
talking to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that's all important. And I think, one of the most important things in there is to just remember to have compassion. It's so hard to forget that, like, even if you disagree with this infectious disease person, you think that what they're saying is false, like, don't send them hate mail. Like, they're just a human being trying to do their best. Like, don't, right? Be cool about it. Just respectfully disagree.
Yeah.
I have
I saw
another.
a YouTube video. I'm going to respectfully disagree with your 30 years of career
Well,
experience.
yeah, there's that too. There's that too. Like the total
But
lack of
yes, respectful
information.
would be nice.
Respect is important, and awareness is important too. I had a question from the audience about what is the,
Sure.
coming back to the spirituality subject, what is the most significant spiritual experience that you have had that
Oh,
was drug induced? That's a big question, right?
that's a big one. I mean, I have had so many. Like I
Uh-huh.
said, I only I walk back those experiences and really science them up afterwards in integration. But um, you know, this might be a way of expressing so probably everyone's somewhat familiar with synesthesia. If they've had a psychedelic experience, there's this, you maybe see music as colors or something like that. There's this kind of mixing up of the senses. Well, what's going on with synesthesia, because there's normal people that experience it every day, is that there's, when you're born, your brain is like a bit of a blob. All sensory information is, you're just awash in it. The differentiating between what is something that you see and what is something that you hear, it takes the brain a while to really categorize those things. And then there's this process of synaptic pruning that happens
Mhm.
where neurons are killed off between these kind of categories, to be like, this is a number, this is a smell, this is a color, and sometimes some of those neurons don't get pruned. And so, like, I, for example, have always seen the number 11 as yellow, and I have to be careful when I say yellow or 11 that I'm saying the correct one. When I see the color yellow, I think 11. And so we all have little bits of that. They think that's why people have foot fetish, because the parts that of the mind that do your foot kind of sensory um stuff is right next to where your genitals the sensory activity for your genitals are, and there's
Okay.
like a bit of a crosstalk there. That may or may not be true, but it sure is fun, huh? Fun speculation. But anyhow, so before we had this terrific modern science to understand this, people that were synesthetic, so we hear of these really abnormal cases of like someone someone that can memorize pi to 27,000 digits, like this
Mm-hmm.
guy Daniel Temmet, who has this book Seeing in Numbers or something like that, and he just like closes his eyes, he pictures pi, and it looks like a landscape of him, and each number, like 317, has a particular shape and color to it, and so he just sees this landscape and reads off what he's seeing. And so we hear things like that, or like someone hearing the word jovial and smelling bacon for some reason. So
Mm-hmm.
you might hear some stuff like that, but it used to be that people had no idea and just thought that everyone else felt the same way. So there's like a conductor that was, don't worry, this is getting to spiritual stuff. There was a conductor that was uh, like in the 1800s or whatever, who he saw music as colors, and so he would be like the violins or whatever, he'd be like, I need a little more violet, and they'd be looking at him, and like and they just learned to like play a different thing,
Uh-huh.
and he'd be like, no, that's orange, I said violet, and they're like, and he's like, that's purple, not quite, and then they'd get it, and then he'd be like, yes, that's it, violet, now bring it up, and then they would learn to associate and be like, oh, when he says violet, he means E flat or whatever. I don't
Okay.
know how music works. But the point is that these two people were both perceiving the same objective experience, which was E flat, and one of them was using this perception of color as their perception saw it, and another was using these invented symbols of like E flat to articulate this same experience. And that, to me, I think is a lot of what the difference between science and spirituality is. To me, I think that we're all kind of after trying to articulate the same thing, and usually just languaging it in a different way. And so in terms of my spiritual experiences, I remember that last ayahuasca one, that was the best trip of my life. I was always so skeptical of the purging idea. Like, come on, you're just a
Right.
bunch of hippies throwing up around your friends and then telling yourself a story of what a great time it was afterwards, especially after I did it the first two times and had thrown up, and I was just like, oh, I was just sick. Like, it was like a mushroom trip but sicker. Like,
Yeah.
what are you're just romanticizing throwing up. I can be a bit of a closed-minded skeptical dick in that way sometimes. But I had the cliche experience myself, which it shouldn't take me having the experience to hear people out, but I had the experience of, it was like I was, so ayahuasca to me is like a mix between mushrooms and like smoking DMT, where it's like you're seeing the DMT world, but it's kind of grounded in this reality as well. And so I was having this experience that, a lot of this floats away like a dream afterwards, but my memory of it was that there was like this kind of creator-ish, to me it seemed like more of a simulator that was also like a it was like, it wasn't like the simulator. It was just like a simulator that, like, one of his jobs is he makes all these simulations,
Hmm.
and one of the simulations is like the creation of universes, not just our universe but many universes. And he had like made so many that they were like hard to keep track of, and they were it was like burning him out, and he didn't have the it's and it was, there was this like metaphor for my own life within, like, I tend to get excited about new ideas too much and pursue a new idea and then chase the next baby and the next baby after that, and then I don't tend to my garden. I plant those seeds, and then it grows out of control, and move on to the next project and forget about all these other wonderful ideas that I was once very excited about. And it was about that, and then it was about like addiction, like this addiction to like needing to feel that feeling or something like that. Like we are both having the kind of same experience, but it was also intertwined with the human condition. And I felt like the depth of desperation of like a meth addict or a crackhead or something like that on their last um the crackhead's probably not a politically correct thing, but anyway, on their last, like, hitting rock bottom, I felt this feeling of like, the feeling of like the cliche, like universal suffering or whatever. I felt all, and it was like such an intense, horrific, painful thing. And the simulator felt it as well. It was also I even remember it kind of like hunched over like a toilet-ish sort of thing. It wasn't quite like that, but it's just a metaphor for what it was like in
Uh-huh.
its whatever its perception is. Anyhow, so I feel this. It's like the most, it was such a um like outrageously horrific feeling that it was like funny. It was like there was nothing to be done about it.
Uh-huh.
I knew that I would never feel anything so awful in my entire life, and it was so horrible. It was like cartoonishly bad. And and I started laughing, and then I just felt it coming. And like when I purged, it was like purging like all of human suffering. It really was just like the single most amazing feeling in my life. And
Wow.
it definitely was, it was very spiritual, and I'm not a spiritual person, and so it messed with my head too. And then like really weird stuff started happening the following day. And then my sciencey brain took over and was still grasping at straws to explain what had happened. And I started believing that I was somehow um, interacting with like time travelers, or influencing the picking up on how to like influence the world or get feedback from
Uh-huh.
future people or something like that. Something was like messing with my reality, and then that started leading to all of this paranoia, and it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. It was at the same time that in the coming weeks of my mania, it was at the same time that Trump and Kim Jong were like, there was the nuclear conflict going on. And I was like, is this a metaphor for the turmoil that's in my own mind? And like, if I don't calm down, will there be like a nuclear war? And so it was like this it was intense. And so maybe part of my aversion to spirituality is I've never had a spiritual experience like the ones that you hear about, where most people are like, I saw God or the spirit or whatever, and it just loved me. And what I mean, I've had those, but I'm always afterwards, I'm like, what the fuck was that? And
Yeah.
that's, I don't understand how that happened. I don't know. I don't, even if that was true, I don't necessarily believe that that thing has my or our best interests in mind. And it kind of spirals for me. And so it's the kind of more scientific logic-ish thing. And by the way, I say scientific. If I run these ideas by scientists, they're looking at me like I'm a lunatic. So
For
I
sure.
don't know how scientific they are, but it's the narrative that grounds me and and helps me integrate and get on with my life. So I definitely, I wish I was the person that was like, won't it be grand if like when we die we get to go to eternity and live in this eternal thing. And to me, I'm like, oh no, you mean I might live forever? Oh dear. You mean there is no escape from this? This is never going to end? It's
Man, I hear
always
that.
been a very unsettling experience. And yeah, I've and it's gone there when I've had, you know, in manic episodes where I'm like, there's nothing I can do. I could kill myself right now, but then if I jumped off a building, I would just like, then I would realize that my consciousness has actually just been in a sidewalk this whole time, waiting for me to smash my head into it.
Right,
And
right.
now I'm just a sidewalk. There is literally no escape. And that's kind of a horrifying thought that it's not my favorite to, to have.
Man, I have so many thoughts that came up for me over here while
Yeah.
you were talking about that. I'm just going to share some of them and we'll see where the conversation goes. For starters, I was raised Mormon, so you know I've got a similar, I guess,
Oh,
upbringing for
yeah.
you.
All right.
Um,
Into
and
it.
then I ended up going to school for physics. I was in graduate school for physics. I was doing research, and I don't really know a whole lot about that subject, you know, because there's so much there. But you know, I obviously went from one side to the other, and I was just like, oh, you know, this God stuff, this spirituality stuff is all bullshit. We made it all up, and that's kind of where I was sitting for a real long time. And smoking five really changed my perspective.
Yeah.
It
That
made
that's
me
that's part of why I've been reluctant to do five, because everyone that's done five is like, I saw it. I saw
yeah.
God. No question anymore. And I'm like, ooh, I would like to keep questioning. So
Well, hey man, you can smoke five and have the realization, and then come back and play your role of Shane Mauss, who questions everything. You know that's allowed. Ain't nothing wrong with that.
yeah.
Um,
No, I do look forward to having that experience.
yeah, I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to hearing
you're
about
that's
it.
a very, very common. It's a very common experience. Well, maybe when I do psychonautics too, I'll do the five and a few other fun things.
Hell yeah, part two, the 2022 edition, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Uh, we'll see. I'm gonna do some other documentaries first. I'm pretty I'm pretty uh I'm reluctant to get myself pigeonholed as like the psychedelic guy.
Sure.
I don't. I'm often thought of as like the psychedelic could be thought of as, I guess, a Shane, just a person that's like really into science, and psychedelics is also a little aspect of what I
Mhm.
do. But because there's such a especially in 2000, it, I was touring before Michael Pollan's book came out, which was a huge. That was impactful in terms of uh, popularizing to just the general public. That was a, a, a like a punctuated equilibrium, if that instead of like a gradual increase in awareness, it was a jump. And um and so, because there has been so few people talking about this stuff, it's when someone does, people are just so excited to hear about it that like, I don't really consider myself a that much of a psychedelic expert. I certainly
Mhm.
don't spend any time reading about psychedelics. I've read like two psychedelic books ever. I've had I all of my what I know about psychedelics is just from one, talking with some people, and two, talking with researchers and stuff, and two, just my own experiences, and taking my experiences and then running them by people that like study memory or psychology or whatever, to see what people outside of the experience will make of them. Um, but people are just so hungry for this, because it's something that just now we're starting to have this this renaissance again, that it's easy to be like, that's the Joe Rogan does DMT, Duncan Trussell's this psychedelic guy, or Shane Mauss has this documentary and talks about DMT or whatever too. And I don't know. I think that I don't know what I think about that. I don't the problem with it from my point of view is that psychedelics were always meant to be the small aspect of what I do, and I'm really grateful that I am able to talk about them openly. It was a big thing for me to like kind of come out of the psychedelic closet. And at the same time, I view psychedelics as a tool for exploring human nature, I view them as a means, not the end. And so when people think of you as like the psychedelic person or whatever, I'm actively kind of trying to avoid that. So all of that is to say, it might be a while before there's a Psychonautics too.
Gotcha. Well, all of the stuff that you're doing is so cool and so broad. So I'm excited for all of it. I've been really enjoying hearing you talk with all the scientists on your podcast. That's just super informative, and it's really amazing how broad your knowledge is, and that's super cool. Of course, this being Psychedelic Club, I have another psychedelic question for you.
Oh yeah, I mean, of course. Well, that's what I'm here for. But
right,
I mean,
right.
outside of the, I would love. Here's my problem. I would love to be able to compartmentalize things. I would love to. I was doing a show called Head Talks and another psychedelic tour combining everything. It was science, comedy, and psychedelics before the pandemic. And it was my favorite tour so far. I love performing. For my main thing is I want to be going to like Tulsa and Arkansas and like places that are underserved, where there's psychedelic people everywhere, but in a place like Denver, there's a little more for them. And like the Flaming Lips are going to come through or whatever else. And there's, or Fish or whatever. And there's just a lot more psychedelic-ish live entertainment available. So I try to go to the kind of underserved places. I love being able to go to like Minot, North Dakota, some city I'd never heard of, and go to like some weird rural backwards place and have like 200 people come out so thrilled because they never get anything like that anywhere else. And that's kind of where I see myself positioned. What I don't like is when I'm doing, say, one of my stand-up science shows where I have two scientists and a second comedian join me, and we're having a conversation about, one person studies the psychology of modern media algorithms, another person studies PTSD or something like, or like zebras or something like that. And then we go to the Q&A at the end, and one of my like fans from my psychedelic thing is like, I have a question. Have you ever seen zebras on DMT? And I'm like, damn it, we're not talking about that right now. So that's the, we all contain multitudes and platitudes, as it turns out. And so I like the idea of being able to keep different aspects of myself separate.
Sure.
Go on with your psychedelic question.
All right. So it sounds kind of like psychedelics are like your stairway to heaven. Like they just want to play another song, right? And you want to like do some other stuff too, right? Like it's a cool song, it's a cool subject, but like there's other stuff in your repertoire.
I like playing it, and I like playing other things too. Yeah.
Cool. So my question
Yeah.
for you is, you have this incredible story about you turned on a friend to DMT for the first time, and he takes a massive number of hits, and he's like in this carnival, and he's like, "Oh, Shane, they love you here. There's this purple lady who knows you," and um, like that's first of all
Yeah.
incredible. Maybe do you chalk that up to suggestion or something like that, or do you think there's some, I don't know, sort of like Joseph Campbell archetypal space going on, or like, do you really have a purple girlfriend in hyperspace?
Well, even if she's real, I'm not sure she's my girlfriend. We have a weird relationship.
Okay.
And it's been like weird. It's she's more like a flirty friend or something like
All
that is
right.
what she seems like. So there's a lot of ways of looking at that. One, that story in particular, people love that story. I like telling it. The additional thing, I had smoked DMT. I saw this purple one. This is like my 20th time I think doing it. Saw this purple woman. Seemed like we known each other for like lifetimes. Um, you know, had a trip. Didn't think much of it, and then it was in this carnival and whatnot. And then the next day, I went to another city. Had DMT. Hit up a friend of mine and was like, "You gotta try this DMT stuff." Didn't tell him anything. He had the DMT experience, and he freaked out for a while, and then basically eventually was like, "Oh, they love you." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "There's this purple woman in here that says that she loves you." I know that I didn't tell him about this purple woman, mostly because it wasn't even that interesting to me at the time. DMT is so crazy that like there's always crazy stuff like that happening, and it wasn't even that notable. But I had told some friends that night, and they didn't know this other person. Um, so I would say a few things. One, it's the hardest thing. It's the hardest experience that I've had to explain. But that is also why people seem to like it so much. I think that I've gained tons of insights that I think that I could share an experience with you, and people would be like, "Oh, that makes sense," and that's an interesting insight into how the mind works. And that one is trickier for me, and I think people tend to gravitate toward the mystery and the unknown. Depending, I think it's just a personality type thing. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, but I think to um, discard the many kind of experiences that I think I do have pretty solid explanations for because the one that I don't have an explanation for, that seems to be the like
Mhm.
religious gotcha stuff that I've been familiar with. The whole like, well, where did the universe come from then? Well, we
Sure.
don't know exactly where the universe started from. Well, then therefore my therefore Jesus is real. Or like,
Yeah.
wait, how does me not knowing where that came from mean that your perspective is it seems like there's always this it does seem like there's this movement. One thing that I would caution, for scientists could be reductionists or whatever. There's many ways in which my perception and things are flawed, and I'm biased. I have noticed, because I'm not a spiritual or religious person, and maybe see it a bit more objectively. Like many of you can probably see the many of my failings a little more objectively than I can. I have seen that religious people tend to like be like, here's the unknown, that's ours. I'm going to plant the flag. The unknown, I have an explanation for that. Quantum physics says we don't know everything, therefore let me tell you how life works.
Mhm.
And that's kind of a little unfair, I think. But it, so so it's just something that I see. So anyhow, um that's something that happens when I tell people about the purple lady. Now, if you want my sciencey explanation, I
Yeah.
would say that we have these archetypes in our minds, and I'm not familiar with Joseph Campbell or Carl Jung's work very well, although people seem to mention it when I share my perspective. I tend to avoid reading about the people that have done similar work to my ideas, to keep it like a little more of a clean test tube, and not influenced as much by like Terence McKenna or whatever. And so so I do think, there's uh like in Steven Pinker's book How the Mind Works, he quite clearly lays out what the brain would need to be doing to say no, for to build a robot that knows what a door is. It used to be that you would need to show it a picture of every single door that could possibly exist, and then if you were to show it a new door, it wouldn't know what the hell it was.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if it was lucky, it could guess at a door, but what humans probably have are these like templates, these exemplars, whatever you want to call them, these archetypes of a door that are these flexible kind of things. So when I see a novel door, or like a castle drawbridge or something, I'm like, oh, that's kind of like a door, and I can make sense of the world because I have this like kind of perfect idea of the perfect door in my mind. I think that and there that we all have a kind of a template of a perfect man or woman or child or fish or whatever in our mind, and there's lots of things with females, like a waist to hip ratio that increases fertility, and you can do this with any species. This thing about the male's peacock says this about its immune system and its lack of parasites, and so there's kind of like this ideal uh, uh, peacock tail that maybe a female would be looking for and basing all other tails off of. And so if it were the case, and these just like look a little bit different in the subconscious mind, so they aren't represented exactly like this reality, much in the way that you smoke DMT and you see a fractal, that might actually be like what the number 40 looks like in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's just stored in a different way in that level of perception that you don't normally have access to. And so take that part of the explanation why we all see, like, say, fractals or different. I've never seen the dribbling basketball things, but if
Me
I go
neither.
and see like a list of a DMT lexicon, and like, here's this door or that, the different things that people have reported, about half of them resonate with me, about half of them don't. But it might be the case that we have these kind of similar structures, much like if you put us both in an MRI, had us close our eyes and picture a basketball in our mind's eye, it wouldn't surprise me if a pretty similar region of our mind lit up in that MRI. I don't know enough about neuroscience, but that's just to give you the idea of what I'm going after. So
Mm-hmm.
if that were the case, if you were to artificially stimulate that part of the mind, would you then imagine a basketball in your mind's eye? And I think maybe that's what's going on with seeing something like this purple woman. Why does my friend see it? Why is she saying that she loves me? Well, he didn't say anything like that until he was just freaking out. He had headphones on. He was listening to music. He took the headphones off because he was like, I had too much. I had too much. It was his first time. It was overwhelming for him. And I said something like, I told I told you that the first couple minutes were going to be intense. It's only been 90 minutes. I said something reassuring to
Mm-hmm.
him. And that is when he said, like, these things came out, and we're like, is that Shane? And he's like, you
Okay.
guys know Shane? And they're like, oh yeah, he comes in here all the time. And then this purple woman comes out. tells him to tell me that she loves me. And it might be that there's just a lot going on there. You have an idea of a perfect woman. You have a feeling of love for a friend. You have reassurance coming. You have, this might be these kind of inside out sort of things that drive all of our behavior. The guys pulling the levers in my brain that are making the words coming out of my mouth right now might look a lot like the guys pulling your levers or whatever. Just like I have for the same reason that we can dream at night and have, like, I could have a dream where you're in my dream tonight. We just met. I've seen you for a few seconds. I might have a convincing representation of you in a dream where you're talking, you sound just like you're using words that are words like you would say, maybe asking me questions about psychedelics or whatever, and I don't even realize that it's me making
Yeah,
this simulation. That's how easy this is for the brain to do that. So I think something like that could be happening to explain the purple woman in a sciencey way. And that's also a demonstration of the number of hoops that I will jump through in the mental acrobatics that I will do to avoid spiritual explanations. I will say, if the purple woman is real, and I'm to like take her for her word, then that also doesn't necessarily mean that she's real in it, because in my subsequent interactions with her, everyone's heard that story. I have like 5 other stories with the purple woman. We've had this whole relationship and have lived like eons of these experiences. And one of the things that we've come up with is that she thinks that she is just an idea in her in my mind. It was actually one of the last times that I had it was like so troubling. Like, she became self-aware. Like, she thought she was like some god or something like that, and didn't know that there was like something outside of, because everything that's in my mind is everything that she has access to. Didn't realize there was something outside of it, and didn't know what to make of it. The last time I saw her, she built this cell made of codes around her, and did this interpretive dance where she was like kind of clawing against the cell walls to like demonstrate how she felt about feeling like she was trapped, that her whole existence was tethered to me being alive, and she's trapped inside of my mind. And I didn't know what to make of that. I was like, well, I hope you'll keep doing whatever it is that you do in my brain that keeps me going or whatever. So, the purple lady doesn't think she's a spirit either in my interactions with her.
Fair
So,
enough.
I don't know what to make of any of it, to be honest. And it's all, all it does. And it does matter, but it doesn't diminish anything. Whether you have a spiritual whether we're saying we're connecting with a simulator, or I'm seeing a God that created all of this wonderful universe, or I'm seeing beings that are in my head, or I went crazy and hallucinated a thing that doesn't exist. All of those things are such significant all of those perspectives should be like, let's stop everything and figure this out. It should be front page news, no matter what your take is on it. And so yeah, I don't think that I want to say that to say that if you have a spiritual take on it, one, I wouldn't blame you. I might if I smoked DMT right now, I'm sure I'd have a spiritual take on it
Totally.
as well. But two, it doesn't, I'm not diminishing the experience by saying that I think that they're in my head. I think it would be one of the most incredible and groundbreaking scientific
Yeah.
discoveries of modern human history if we actually found something like that out. And so either way, it's significant.
Totally. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was really cool to hear that. We are just about at the end of our time here. Before you go, I'd love to just have you give us a rundown. Where can we check you out? And also, everybody, Shane did this for free. He chose to have us donate all of the ticket sales to the Mercury to help them stay open through COVID. So, Shane, how can we support you in this time?
There's plenty of ways. I mean, if you want to support me financially, you can get on my Patreon, number one.
Cool.
But there's plenty of free things people can do to support artists, whether it's your favorite musician or painter or whatever else. Leaving nice comments on social media, sharing things, going on to, like, I just launched my podcast was all audio before this, and so I built a good audio version, like if you're on Stitcher, iTunes or whatever. But I started adding YouTube when COVID happened, and I have yet to figure out like how those algorithms work and stuff. So go and subscribe to my YouTube. That'd be huge, because I only have like 1,000 subscribers right now. There's a million things like that. Twitter is a good place for my I'm pretty sassy on Twitter. And if you don't like political stuff, probably don't follow me on Twitter. I like to use it to blow off steam. Facebook, which I don't use that much, I tend to write a little more long formy stuff. I've also been a hair preachy on there as the election season is happening. Instagram, which I never even used until COVID, I've enjoyed the most. I didn't think I was ever going to like it, and I'm pretty silly on Instagram, and I share a lot of podcast highlights. And my podcast is overall, I would say, fairly atypical, or sorry, apolitical. Whereas most academics are pretty cautious to not say one thing or another in terms of political thing. But so yeah, I mean, I guess just checking out my podcast, Here We Are, is the biggest thing that I'm most proud of. So it's not for it's not for everyone, because it's not a comedy podcast. But if you like hearing a comedian asking scientists and talking about things in a way that's accessible for everyone, like I said, we talk, like, cognitive biases are my big thing that I like talking about probably the most. But we've had like some great insect episodes lately, and we run the gamut. We actually don't talk about physics too much, even though I love physics, but don't have I feel like that's kind of covered in podcasts.
That's fair.
So, but yeah, so check that out. And
cool.
Yeah, it's cool. Thanks for your attention and support, and coming out and supporting live things. And I hope everyone is mentally healthy and physically healthy and well, and stays safe and isn't too stressed. I made, COVID's not. I take COVID seriously, and I also don't stress about it. I don't think that. I think that if you're doing the right things, there's no reason to have undue stress in your life. So I hope I also didn't try to spread panic or fear earlier when I was talking about long haulers and stuff.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, man. We appreciate you. Hope to have you back again, and move to Denver. It's a great place.
I love it there. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
All right.
All right.
Have a great night, man. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys. Thank you.